He walked out the door with a suitcase in one hand and a smug smile on his face, leaving me behind for someone half my age. He thought he'd trade it up, thought he'd start fresh without a care in the world. But what he didn't realize was that every step of his new life would still be tied to me, right down to the divorce papers. Tell me, have you ever watched someone leave only to learn they couldn't escape the strings they'd cut? Share your story in the comments. Now let's get straight into today's tale. The first time I noticed the distance, it was subtle. He stopped lingering at the table after dinner. He started dressing sharper for late nights at the office. He smiled at his phone more than at me. I wanted to believe it was stress, maybe midlife restlessness, but deep down, I already knew. One evening, he came home later than usual. His tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled, but his face lit up like a teenager's. When I asked where he'd been, he shrugged. Out with friends. You wouldn't know them. But I wasn't naive. I'd seen the signs, the long showers, the cologne that hadn't been for me in years, the new playlists on his phone full of songs about starting over. And then, just like that, the truth spilled out. He didn't confess. He bragged. "I've met someone," he said, grinning. "She's younger. She makes me feel alive again." Alive? As though the years we'd built together, raising children, paying bills, weathering storms, had been nothing but a long, dull death. I sat in silence, the words pressing against my chest like weights. He packed a bag that same night, humming as though he were heading off on vacation instead of breaking a marriage. And within a week, there she was, paraded on social media like a prize. She wasn't just younger. She was bold about it. Pictures of dinners, trips, selfies with him smiling like a fool. "New beginnings," the captions read. My phone lit up with the updates I didn't want but couldn't stop seeing. People whispered. Friends avoided my eyes at the grocery store. And at night, I lay in bed staring at the empty space beside me, the betrayal echoing through every corner of the house. But here's the thing about betrayal. After the tears dry, something else rises in their place. Resolve. I realized quickly that he hadn't just walked away from me. He'd walked straight into a future that still had my fingerprints all over it. Our finances were entangled. Our house, our accounts, our years of shared labor, none of it could be erased with a suitcase and a smile. And when the word divorce came floating into the conversations, carried on his arrogance like it was a gift he was giving me, I almost laughed. Because divorces are messy. They're expensive. They require signatures, lawyers, and bills. And who do you suppose was about to foot the cost? Not him. Not the new beginning. Me. The very woman he'd cast aside. I sat at the kitchen table one night, the paperwork spread in front of me, pen in hand, and instead of tears, I felt a calmness I hadn't expected, because the irony was too rich to ignore. He had left me for someone younger, but I was the one paying for his freedom. His happy ending came stamped with my name, and somehow that made the story sweeter than any revenge I could have planned. The divorce started the way I expected, loud on his end, quiet on mine. He walked into the first meeting with his lawyer, grinning like he'd already won, hand in hand with his younger prize. She sat beside him, all perfume and smugness, as though she were auditioning for the role of new wife in front of the judge. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and smirked at me across the table. "This won't take long," he said. "Let's just get this over with so we can all move on." Move on. As if 30 years of marriage could be folded up and tossed into the trash like yesterday's newspaper. The lawyers talked numbers, assets, accounts. His voice got louder with every line item. "That's mine. I deserve that. She doesn't need this." He gestured at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room. But here's what he didn't realize. Arrogance doesn't pay bills. Every request he made came with a price. Every paper filed, every hour billed, every little demand he pushed through his lawyer's mouth, it all stacked up. And who had been the financial backbone for years? Who had handled the accounts, the mortgage, the savings? Me. So as he strutted and postured, I sat quietly, listening, waiting. Because while he thought he was proving his dominance, all he was doing was running up costs he couldn't cover. Weeks turned into months. The younger woman stayed glued to his side at every hearing, her manicured fingers laced through his. She whispered in his ear, casting glances at me like she'd already won. But behind her glossy smile, I began to see it. The cracks. The way her expression faltered when the lawyer mentioned fees. The way she shifted uncomfortably when the judge ordered evaluations, appraisals, signatures. Divorce isn't glamorous. It isn't champagne toasts and tropical vacations. It's paperwork, bills, endless waiting, and checks. And every check had my name on it. One afternoon, as I signed yet another payment, I caught myself smiling. Not a bitter smile, but a knowing one. Because while he sat across town, laughing about his fresh start, his freedom was literally being bought by the woman he'd abandoned. By me. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I hadn't plotted, hadn't schemed. I had simply let the system run its course. And the course led straight through my bank account. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had told me I was holding him back was now being held up by me in the most literal way possible. Every dinner he bought her, every vacation they bragged about, every step toward his shiny new life, it was paved with the money he thought he'd escaped. And strangely, instead of bitterness, I felt a calm satisfaction. He wanted to erase me. But the truth was he couldn't. Even in leaving, even in betrayal, I was still the foundation, and that was a lesson neither of them would ever be able to ignore. At first, he flaunted his freedom, photos of dinners, weekend trips, new clothes. He looked like a man reborn, grinning ear to ear beside her, while she showed off the jewelry and champagne glasses. Friends whispered that he'd moved on, that I was left behind. But I knew better, because beneath every sparkling picture, there were invoices piling up. Lawyers don't work for free. Court filings don't come cheap. And with every motion, every demand he pushed through, the bills grew higher. He had always been careless with money, the kind of man who spent first and thought later. During our marriage, I'd been the one to balance the books, to keep us steady. Without me, he was a ship without a compass. And now, dragging along a passenger who loved champagne, but not budgeting. The first sign showed in the little things. He called one evening, voice tight, trying to sound casual. Hey, could you maybe cover this last round of fees? I'll pay you back. I almost laughed. Pay me back? The same man who had walked out with a suitcase now wanted a safety net. But I didn't argue. I signed the check, sent it through, and let the irony hang in the air. Meanwhile, the younger woman's shine began to dull. I heard whispers from mutual friends. She complained about his stress, about the constant money stuff, about how he wasn't as fun as he used to be. No amount of roses could mask the reality. She hadn't signed up for bills and courtrooms. She wanted romance, not reality. At the next hearing, I saw it in her face. She sat beside him, but the sparkle was gone. Her arms folded, her eyes narrowed every time the lawyer mentioned costs. When the judge asked for yet another appraisal, she sighed loudly, as though even she was tired of the game. He, of course, kept pretending, puffing his chest, insisting on more, convinced he was winning. But I saw the truth in the way he tugged at his collar, the way sweat gathered at his temples. Divorce wasn't freeing him. It was draining him. And the sweetest part? Every dollar draining was still mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The quiet satisfaction was enough. Watching him squirm under the weight of a life he thought would be effortless was victory enough. One afternoon, after another drawn-out session, I caught his eye across the room. He looked at me, just for a second, and I saw it. Not love, not longing, but recognition. He knew. He knew that no matter how far he ran, no matter how young she was, no matter how loud he bragged, his freedom came with a price tag I had paid. And it must have burned him more than any insult I could have thrown. Because sometimes the harshest justice isn't delivered with anger. Sometimes it's delivered with a pen, a checkbook, and the silence of a woman who refuses to break. It didn't take long for the cracks to widen. At first, she just looked restless, scrolling through her phone while he argued with lawyers. But soon the whispers reached me. Through friends, through neighbors, through the grapevine that always buzzes when drama stirs. She says he's always stressed. She thought he had money, but now it's just bills. She's not happy. And I believed every word, because I had lived that life with him. The difference was I had built stability underneath it all. She, on the other hand, had walked into chaos dressed up as charm. One day, after a hearing, I saw them in the parking lot. He was red-faced, waving his arms, papers flapping in his hands. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her expression pure exhaustion. When she caught me watching, her eyes narrowed, then quickly looked away. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, because here was the truth. She hadn't stolen anything from me. She had inherited a burden I had already carried for decades. She thought she was getting the prize. Instead, she got the bills, the shouting, the man who never planned past tomorrow, and slowly, she started to disappear. At family events, I noticed she wasn't on his arm anymore. His smile, once smug and full of bravado, had dulled. He looked tired, older, weighed down. Friends told me she had moved back in with a roommate, that she needed space. I wasn't surprised, because relationships built on betrayal rarely stand when real life sets in. Meanwhile, I found myself breathing easier. Nights no longer felt heavy with bitterness. Mornings carried a quiet peace. The house was mine, the routine was mine, and for the first time in years, the silence was comforting instead of cruel. I didn't chase after updates about him. I didn't need to. Life has a way of carrying whispers to your doorstep when you least expect it. And every whisper confirmed what I already knew. He had traded stability for fantasy, and reality had caught up with him faster than he ever imagined. One evening, as I sat with a cup of tea by the window, I thought back to the day he left, smiling, humming, suitcase in hand. He had looked so certain, so sure that I was behind him, irrelevant, forgotten. But here he was, unraveling, and here I was, steady. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. I hadn't set traps or plotted schemes. I had simply let the truth play out. And the truth was this: his freedom, his fresh start, his younger woman, it had all been built on foundations I provided. And when those foundations shifted, the house of cards collapsed. The satisfaction didn't come from his downfall. It came from knowing I had survived it all, stronger and steadier than he ever expected. Sometimes the sweetest justice is simply living well while others fall under the weight of their own choices. Time has a way of settling things. Months passed and the noise around him faded. No more flashy dinners posted online. No more photos with her on his arm. The man who once strutted out of my life like he was stepping into a movie was now just another middle-aged divorcee with bills stacked higher than his pride. I heard eventually that she had left him for good. The sparkle of his new life had dulled into late payments and empty promises. She hadn't signed up for responsibility, she'd signed up for a fantasy. And when the reality hit, she packed her bags quicker than he had packed his on the night he left me. And me? I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was free. I sat at my kitchen table one morning, the same spot where I had once cried over betrayal, and realized the tears were gone. In their place was something steadier, peace. Because here's what I learned. Sometimes life doesn't give you the revenge you think you want. It doesn't always hand you dramatic victories or grand apologies. Sometimes the justice is quieter. It shows up in the way arrogance collapses under its own weight. It shows up in the irony of a man thinking he'd escaped me, only to find his freedom signed, sealed, and paid for by my hand. And oh, how fitting that was. Every check I signed was a reminder, not of loss, but of strength. Because while he was out there pretending to be free, the truth was simple. His new life depended on me. His so-called fresh start was bought with my stability, my resources, my patience. At first, I thought that would hurt, that it would make me feel like the fool. But in the end, it only made me stronger. Because I realized something he never did. Money can pay for lawyers, but it can't buy dignity. That I had kept all along. One evening, a neighbor asked me, "Don't you feel angry that you had to pay for it all?" I smiled. Not at all, because he'll never forget who signed the checks. Every step he took away from me, every laugh he shared with her, every so-called victory, it all carried my name underneath. That's a weight he'll never shake. And that was enough for me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to seek revenge. I simply lived and let the truth take care of itself. Now when I look back, I don't see the night he left as the end of something. I see it as the beginning of me standing on my own, stronger than ever, while he stumbled into the very trap he thought was freedom. And the sweetest part? He'll spend the rest of his life knowing that his great escape was written, quite literally, in my handwriting. So here's what I learned. Sometimes the justice life hands you isn't loud or dramatic. It's ironic. My husband thought leaving me for someone younger made me irrelevant. He thought he was starting fresh, free from the woman who built his stability. But in the end, every step of that freedom was paid for by me. And the best part? He knows it. Deep down, he'll never forget that the divorce he celebrated came stamped with my signature, funded by the very person he walked away from. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't slamming doors. It's sitting quietly, living well, while the truth speaks for itself. Tell me, have you ever been dismissed, only to realize you held the last word? Share it in the comments, and stay tuned. More stories of quiet justice are still to come.